Hello, and welcome back to Writing Tips. This is the seventh video in the Story Developer series. I'm your host, Sherry. Feel free to reach out to me with your questions. Last time, we talked about your character's motivations in detail. This time, we will add to your character's profile and their place in the story by discussing the stakes they face and what that implies about their values. We'll explore how conflict is the anvil on which character growth is forged, and how that character change creates meaning in your story. So let's get started. Every character should have a distinct voice. Part of creating that voice is giving your character an attitude, their own opinions about the world, who they believe they are, who they could be if the opportunity arose. A character's personal philosophy affects her reactions to events in your story. Their reactions must be consistent with their philosophy, or the character won't be believable. But the character's reactions must also be surprising on some level. I've been using Susan May Warren's book, The Story Equation, to show you how a fully rounded character is developed. I highly recommend this book as an adjunct to these two videos. Warren defines a story like this: a sympathetic character who wants something for a good reason but has something to lose, goes on a quest to attain that goal and solve a problem. He faces substantial internal and external obstacles and discovers he must change and grow to overcome them until he finds himself in a better place at the ending. Let's break that down a little. A sympathetic character, well, I would say an empathetic character, but you get the idea. Warren considers the reader's bond to the protagonist an important aspect of the story. Must want something for a good reason. That speaks to motivation, but has something to lose. That's the stakes. Who goes on a quest to attain that goal and solve a problem. Well, that's the story goal. We know the story isn't finished until this goal is addressed somehow. He faces substantial internal and external obstacles. That's the conflict, and discovers he must change and grow to overcome his obstacles. That's the character arc, until he finds himself in a better place at the ending. That's the happily ever after moment. So far, we've covered the empathetic character, their motivation, and their noble quest or goal. We'll conquer stakes next. If nothing is at stake, then a person's choices don't matter, and the reader will begin to lose interest. Stakes connect your plot to the reader's heart and give the reader a reason to root for your hero. They keep the reader and the protagonist in the story pursuing the goal. There are two major categories of stakes. Public, for example, society's struggle against tyranny. War movies and spy thrillers use the stakes of protecting the nation. If the war story in question is about World War II or its allegory Star Wars, freedom against empire might be the stakes. Sometimes it's saving the entire world, as in The Hunt for Red October, where the heroes are saving the world from a Cold War weapon, or Independence Day, where they're saving the world from aliens. But it's just as powerful a story if the protagonist isn't saving the world, just their little corner of it, as in Erin Brockovich, who's trying to save a town from a chemical company polluting the water system. Or even just one person's individual rights, as in To Kill a Mockingbird. Culturally, Americans love these stories about fighting for freedom. It hits the high notes of our heritage. Is the issue in your story pertinent to public values? Ask yourself, does it touch the heart of all of us? Does it tap into the American dream? What public event do you fear happening? Public stakes, even of epic proportions, do not always touch the reader's heart. Personal stakes must influence the public stakes in some way. Create more powerful tension for your story about high public stakes by adding personal stakes in line with the goal the protagonist must accomplish. Anakin Skywalker isn't just becoming the face of the Empire in Star Wars. Ultimately, he's seeking redemption. The Last of Us became a blockbuster not because zombies were destroying the world, but because Ellie emotionally replaces Joel's deceased daughter, increasing the stakes from life or death for Joel to the safety of his found family. I don't even like the zombie genre, and I was compelled to watch all of the episodes, season 1 and season 2. In Gladiator, Maximus carries the burden of fulfilling the dying wish of Emperor Marcus Aurelius to restore the Roman Republic and prevent Commodus's tyranny. That wouldn't have been nearly as compelling if Commodus hadn't murdered Maximus's family and stripped him of his title as general of the Felix legions. We root for Maximus because we want revenge for him. Aretha Franklin's a black woman who wants respect in the turbulent 60s and 70s. But first she has to develop her own self-respect. One of the reasons we root for Will in Good Will Hunting is because we see that he deserves a meaningful life. We mourn the loss of Trevor's innocence in Pay It Forward because he's trying to help others. And finally, we root for John to save Holly from the terrorists in Die Hard, not because of Alan Rickman's brilliant performance as villain Hans Gruber, nor because it's Christmas, or because John's a cop, but because he still loves his estranged wife. Even though none of us have ever tried to save a loved one from a high-rise full of terrorists at Christmas, we all still feel for John as he tries to do so, not because we've faced his stakes, the potential death of his wife, but because we share the same values as John: love. Stakes are real-world consequences. At the root of stakes are our values. They represent abstract core beliefs, things we care about, that provide strong motivations, the things we long for. A value is something the character wants, has lost, or something that has saved him in the past. Shared values with the protagonist make the reader care about them and root for their success. But our personal stakes aren't always in line with public stakes, are they? The most compelling public versus private stakes have competing values. Two equally worthy values pitted against each other in a story, creating inner dissonance for the protagonist. Competing values make the story stick to the reader in a way nothing else can: longevity and resonance. We care more about the sacrifices people made during World War II because Rick so obviously and painfully loves Ilsa. That's why Sophie is made to choose which of her two children to save in Sophie's Choice. Why Summersby must choose between his personal survival and the economic survival of people in the community he created. Why Jim remains alone as long as possible before he dooms another person to waking up 90 years too soon in Passengers. The key to creating this effect with conflicting stakes is to make sure your protagonist chooses the value that most readers would not choose. That proves your character is stronger than most of us, more altruistic. However, the reader must believe this is the character's choice, no matter how painful. Ask yourself, what values drive your character? What matters most to your character? What would your character die for? What would make your character refuse to save the day? What threat could be added to the story on a personal level that would make your character think twice before engaging in the final conflict with the antagonist at the climax? Once you find two different values, ask, in what situation will these values be pitted against each other? A complex character, the kind readers love, should have both outer and inner conflict. The outer conflict is fairly easy to develop. It is usually based on solving the plot problem. The inner motive is more complicated. It can be almost anything and doesn't have to be related to the plot problem. The best combination of motives are a pair of mutually exclusive ones. The protagonist can't achieve one without giving up the other. This constraint sets up a natural internal conflict in the character and can lead to unexpected plot twists and will keep the reader involved. In effect, the author has constructed an engine of motive and anti-motivation. If the character achieves the goal with no real issue, there's no story. The character must face conflict, both external conflict in the material world and internal conflict in the emotional moral world. Overcoming the conflict means the character will have to grow in some way during the course of the story. This growth is called the character arc. Conflict is not adversity. Adversity is an obstacle that needs to be climbed over to achieve a goal. It's fine to have adversity, but it's not a substitute for conflict. Conflict must be another character who's trying to actively stop your protagonist from achieving their goal. Conflict creates tension. Another way to say tension is reader worry. Conflict causes the reader to worry that the story goal won't be met. That drives the reader forward through the story. They're compelled to keep reading to see if the goal is met or not, and what the consequences will be if the goal is not met. Frequently, conflict comes from the antagonist, but it doesn't have to come only from the antagonist. Characters in conflict interacting with one another are inherently interesting. Dialogue in conflict is very interesting to readers. Ask yourself, what obstacles to the external goal could create adversity and tension? Who or what do I want stopping the character from getting what they want? Why is that person stopping them? If the character displays indecisive, weak-kneed behavior throughout the story, he can't, at the end, become decisive and strong-willed unless the reader is shown a healthy dose of inner anguish as the character's competing aspects slug it out. While a character can and should change over the course of a story, the change must be accompanied by suitable motivation. This change must result from the internal conflict between two opposing aspects of the character, such as fear and courage. Internal conflict comes in many flavors. The easiest to contemplate is good versus evil. We wish to be virtuous, but we're tempted by sin. That one is literally as old as the Bible. Desire versus fear is more interesting. The character wants to talk to that person over there, but fears rejection. Or they've insulated themselves from loss, but that leaves them alone, and now they have an opportunity to reach out to someone new, but that would risk losing again. Competing desires are even more fascinating because it is not clear what the character should do, and that makes it more like a real life decision. The character is lonely, but not willing to give up their freedom to be with another. Finally, the most interesting inner conflict, desire versus what we wish we desired. This one's the hardest conflict to wrap your head around, but full of delicious conflict that readers love. The best example of this I've ever heard comes from Professor Timothy Spurgeon during his course, The Art of Reading, on Great Courses. Here's the idea. You are a man stranded on a tropical island. One of the people on the island is a beautiful redhead. But even though there are only 5 people on the island, the woman acts like you don't exist. There is another woman on the island who is hanging around your hut all the time. She's not bad looking, perky, clean, girl next door type. Life would be so much easier. Being stuck on this island would be almost bearable if you just wanted that woman and not the voluptuous movie star. But your real desire and what you wish you desired are in conflict. We're almost there. Just so you don't get lost, next up on Warren's list is change and grow. Writers have 2 jobs. Make the reader believe and make them care. Readers want to believe. All a writer has to do is make a world that is consistent and characters who act in a way the reader understands. Readers care when the characters make them feel something. Character evolution or de-evolution is one of the many things that cracks our veneer and makes us care. People are fascinated by growth in fictional characters, particularly altruistic growth. Jessica Morel presents this idea as a scale of altruistic growth. Level -1 are these sociopathic killers and other monsters like Hannibal Lecter and Dexter. Level 0 is more animalistic, amoral rather than immoral, like Tarzan or Helen Keller before Anne Sullivan. Level 1 is selfish characters. A lot of villains and antagonists fall into this category where they only care about themselves. Level 2 is bonded to one other person, like the Great Gatsby. All he can ever see is Daisy. Level 3 is bonded to a family or clan, like Jim Vance, the fiercely loyal dragon of the Hatfield clan in the Hatfields and McCoys. Level 4 is bonded to a community or nation, like William Wallace in Braveheart. And level 5 is bonded to all of humanity. They love and forgive everyone, including villains like Gandhi or Jesus. Part of why Rain Man became a blockbuster is because Charlie Babbitt character goes from level 1, selfish, to level 2, caring about his disabled brother Raymond. The same with Gone with the Wind. Scarlett goes from manipulating men for her own selfish gains to caring about Rhett. But A Christmas Carol has endured all this time because Dickens made us believe a man went from level 1, selfish, to level 5, caring about the whole world in just one night. Casablanca has fascinated moviegoers for generations. In Rick's backstory, his altruism level goes from a 2, caring about Ilsa, to 1, only self-interest, when Ilsa appears to have abandoned him. Rick arrives in Morocco selfish and stays that way until the beginning of the movie. Ilsa, though, is still at a level 4. She fears for all of Europe if the Nazis win the war. When she comes back into Rick's life, things could go either way. The first half of the movie, Rick progresses back to caring about Ilsa, going from a level 1 to level 2, but Ilsa slips from a level 4, caring about her nation, to a level 2, only caring about a life with Rick. By the end, Rick jumps up to caring about Europe from a level 2 to a level 4, and forces Ilsa back to a level 4 with him. Incidentally, people are equally fascinated by characters falling back down the scale. Breaking Bad took 5 seasons to show Walter White falling from model citizen and school teacher to murderous drug lord. The show dominated dramatic TV for much of that time. King Lear is another lasting example of devolving altruism. Both stories prove that going down is a slippery slope, and it's easy to end up at the lowest levels. By the way, superheroes generally don't change their altruism level. They always seem to care about the good of the whole world. So writers make them care about other people who have internal conflicts and altruistic changes. Change requires 3 things to happen: a moment of enlightenment, a decision, and implementation of sustained change in action. During enlightenment, the character experiences something they never experienced before, or sometimes that affects them differently than it ever has before. By itself, a moment of enlightenment is not change, just a momentary awareness. Denial and anger often arise with enlightenment, blocking its effect. Bargaining dilutes the positive effects of a moment of enlightenment as well. Because of the moment of enlightenment, the character makes a decision. However, in fiction, as in life, it is not necessarily a good decision. Was Frodo particularly smart to make the decision at Rivendell to continue as ring-bearer? After that, the character is either, number 1, stuck with the decision, externally imposed change, or number 2, sticks with the decision, internally motivated change. Still, by itself, the decision is not change, just a fleeting commitment. Again, bargaining can dilute a decision, and depression can cause the character to give up on a decision. Because of the decision, the character changes their behavior. When the changed behavior is sustained long enough, it becomes a habit. Thus, to change themselves, our character must change their habits. Sustained action leads to true change. We all have a pre-linguistic need for resolution of discord through beauty and harmony. Readers crave your creativity to revive their lives from the deadening power of life's pounding routine. Life often separates meaning from emotion. Life experience becomes meaningful only after we are calm and reflective, long after the actual experience and its powerful emotions are only a memory. In real life, moments that fuse ideas and emotions to a change that happens in the core of our being are rare. So rare, they feel like a religious experience. Art creates meaning in the moment. The instant we see the events happening, meaning and emotion fuse. An idea wrapped in the electric charge of emotion is powerful, profound, and memorable. Writer and reader are exchanging their ideas directly through the senses, perceptions, intuitions, and emotions of their characters. The fusion of meaning to emotion creates an epiphany for your main character. Other characters may also experience an epiphany, but at least your protagonist must see the world more clearly than they saw it at the beginning. Frequently, an epiphany requires a crisis, some event that brings conflict into sharp focus and forces a reevaluation of the character's life. There can be no easy solution to this crisis. Your protagonist must examine his past to come to grips with his present. The character has to reckon with the self and his or her own flaws. The epiphany and climax lead to the reader's catharsis. They can even lead to a reader changing their worldview. Let's reevaluate our story timeline to see where and when to concentrate on stakes, values, conflict, growth, and change. Opposing values become prominent in Act 1 when the protagonist considers whether to embark on the noble quest or not. After the protagonist commits to the quest, fill the first half of Act 2 with stakes to show the protagonist's values and to develop the strength of the goal or noble quest. Stakes push the character forward in turns during Act 2. An antagonist shows up early in Act 2 to provide conflict, help you increase the stakes, and provide a contrast to your protagonist's values. The protagonist is forced to choose one of these values to complete the noble quest at the crisis or death moment. That leads to character change. At the climax, the tension between the protagonist and the antagonist has a peak, and they have their final and most explosive conflict. If the protagonist is true to the decision he made at the crisis moment, he wins the conflict, and we get a glimpse of his happily ever after before the story closes. In the show notes, I have several links to worksheets. One is called Character Overview. We're going to use that worksheet to write a micro character sketch for each of your major characters so you can see your cast as a whole. Start with the character's name. Use the character's title to provide a one-sentence summary of the character's storyline. The character's motivation, what does he or she want abstractly, emotionally, and how does the character's inner life contrast with the outer facade they portray to the world? Then the character's actual goal, what does he or she want concretely, and what prevents him or her from reaching this goal? The character's inner conflict, what prevents him or her from reaching the goal emotionally? The character's epiphany, what will he or she learn? How will he or she change? Not all characters will have an epiphany, by the way. And from what altruistic level does the character move, and to what level does he move to? Main characters are more interesting when their inner growth moves them either up or down their altruistic scale. Finally, write a one-paragraph summary of the storyline from your character's point of view. Next time, we'll take a more in-depth look at how conflict influences the major plot points. But before I say goodbye, I have a little announcement. I want to give all my Writing Tips subscribers a gift by the end of 2025. Every free subscriber to Writing Tips on January 1st will get a coupon for 20 pages of their work edited by me for free. That's 5,500 words. I'll do inline comments and an overall assessment of the elements of your writing with suggestions to make your writing more immersive for readers. Happy New Year, and I'll see you next year.